Industrial accidents are about as horrific as it gets. If you've ever had the misfortune of stumbling on a video of someone getting caught in some giant machine in a factory, you know exactly what I'm talking about. These machines don't know your hand was where it shouldn't have been or that your hair or clothes got caught. The end result is always the same. So in this video, we're going to look at 3 disturbing industrial accidents. As always, viewer discretion is strongly advised. If you're like me and you listen to videos constantly as you work, drive, or whatever else, you probably also have earbuds in for a good chunk of that time. You might even be listening through earbuds right now. And if you do, you probably know how crucial it is to have earbuds that are both high quality and comfortable. And that's where today's sponsor Raycon and their awesome earbuds come in. Right now, Raycon is offering 15% off their essential open earbuds, but beyond just the deal, their earbuds differ from average ones in a few cool key ways. First and most importantly, they have an open ear design. So although they sit right at the ear canal and are just as loud as regular earbuds, they're not plugging your ears. This makes them both more comfortable and keeps your ears open to your surroundings while still delivering crystal clear sound. And to ensure they stay in place, they have a multi-angular hook to keep them over your ear, almost no matter how hard you try to get them off. I tested them running and in the gym, and they stayed in place no problem while also being comfortable the entire time. They also have multi-point connection, meaning you can switch seamlessly between devices, and they come with 36 hours of battery life in the charging case. On top of everything else though, they offer the same premium audio quality as bigger brands at half the price, and they have a 30-day happiness guarantee if you aren't satisfied. So if you want to get a pair and take advantage of the discount, the essential open earbuds are the perfect addition to your everyday routine. Click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/scaryinterestingopen to get 15% off the essential open earbuds. Thanks again to Raycon for sponsoring the video, and now for today's story. Salzburger Aluminum AG, which is simply known as SAG, had been operating for more than a century by March of 2012. Established in 1898, the company evolved over time into a global producer of aluminum parts serving the automotive, commercial transport, aerospace, and rail sectors. This wasn't a small shop either. The plant in Linz, Austria was part of a modern industrial operation employing more than 1,100 people. And one of the most constant presences inside the facility, other than its workers, was heat. Aluminum production depends on it, and one part of that process involves preheating furnaces. These were chambers designed to bring metal up to temperature before smelting, which is when heat is used to extract usable metal from raw ore. Chamber 1 had been a key stop in that process at SAG for 6 years by that point, and under normal operating conditions, temperatures inside the chamber could reach up to 752 degrees Fahrenheit or 400 Celsius. Then when connected to the broader smelting system, heat levels could rise even further, up to 1472 degrees Fahrenheit or 800 Celsius. Its interior measured about 6 feet long by 6 feet wide, or 2 meters by 2 meters, and stood 8.5 feet or 2.6 meters tall. This made it large enough for workers to step inside when maintenance was required. First thing in the morning on March 8, 2012, it was found that a metal plate inside Chamber 1 had come loose. This was an issue that's pretty common inside industrial furnaces, and the systems required regular cleaning and periodic repairs. Around 9 a.m., a furnace operator informed the chain of command of the needed repair, and 2 maintenance workers responded to the order right away. One of the men was a 56-year-old named Reinhard. He was a longtime veteran of SAG and had begun his apprenticeship there in 1971, so he had more than 4 decades of experience under his belt. The second was a 49-year-old unnamed man who had been assigned to the plant through a temporary employment agency, and he was working under Reinhard's supervision that day. When the two arrived at Chamber 1, they immediately stepped inside to have a look at what it might take to repair the loose plate. At some point shortly after they entered, the sliding door to the chamber slammed shut. The door was about 11 inches or 28 centimeters thick, and once it sealed, it locked the interior from outside access. The chamber, after all, was designed to contain heat and not allow it to exit during operation. A moment after the door shut, the heating phase began, and waste heat from the connected smelting furnace flowed into Chamber 1. As heat moved into the chamber, the air temperature began climbing rapidly around Reinhard and the temporary worker. The 2 men would have realized what was happening as the heat intensified, and they scrambled for a way to escape. They tore insulation from the walls and clawed at the inside of the door as they tried to force it open. But once the door shut and the heating process began, that was it. There was no way to stop it. As temperatures continued to rise, their clothing eventually ignited, and then they did. It's unclear how long it took for the two men to pass, but their final moments were likely beyond words. Hours passed afterward, and around midday, coworkers began noticing that the two men were missing. By about 1 p.m., the furnace operator opened Chamber 1 and discovered the horrifying scene inside. Reinhard and the temp worker were so bad that they were beyond recognition. Emergency services were then notified at 1:39 p.m., roughly 4.5 hours after the heating process began, and an investigation into what happened got underway. All the employees at the plant were questioned, and a forensics team examined the chamber and the surrounding equipment. Authorities worked to reconstruct the morning's events, but at first, the sequence of how it all went down was unclear. The door had been closed and the heating process had begun, but no one quite knew how this was possible because the system had safeguards intended to prevent this exact scenario. Everything would have needed to be done manually in order for the furnaces to start up, yet none of the employees claimed responsibility. The case stood in limbo for several days as investigators and plant workers alike remained puzzled by how this could have happened. But a phone call on Saturday changed everything. The man on the other end was the furnace operator that morning, and he reached out to police days after his initial interview because he felt guilty he had not been more forthcoming about what happened Thursday morning. During his second interview with investigators, the picture cleared up significantly. Earlier that morning, the furnace operator had noticed the loose metal plate inside Chamber 1. Using a forklift, he removed it and placed it beside the furnace before reporting the damage to his supervisors, who called for the maintenance team to have a look. Around 9 a.m., he returned to Chamber 1 and saw the broken plate was still standing next to the furnace where he had left it. He saw no other workers nearby and no signs that the furnace was being reviewed for repair. The missing piece also wasn't a critical piece of the chamber, meaning the furnace would operate as intended until someone was able to come repair it. So from his forklift, the furnace operator remotely closed the sliding door and hit the button to begin the heating process. From what investigators found, only about 1 minute had passed between Reinhard and the temp worker entering the chamber and the furnace operator closing the door. The operator had no indication that anyone was inside it at the time, and the reason for that would soon come to light. Through further investigation, authorities learned that there were 4 required safety measures that needed to be executed before anyone entered any of the heating chambers. According to SAG officials, those measures included completely switching off the chamber and attaching a padlock to the key switch, then switching the operating mode to manual so it could not be activated remotely. Next was placing a visible warning sign indicating that workers were inside, and finally installing a bolt that prevents the door from closing completely and blocks activation of the furnace. Unfortunately, it seems that none of this protocol was followed that morning by Reinhard and the temp worker. Because of this, the furnace operator believed that the maintenance work hadn't yet gotten underway. When he closed the door and started the heating cycle, the system did exactly what it was intended to do. Since there were no tools or equipment found within the chamber along with the bodies, it's assumed by investigators that Reinhard and the temp worker were merely popping into the chamber to see what they'd need to complete the job. They likely intended to be inside for only a moment or two, but that was just long enough. In a subsequent trial of the company and some of its employees, all were found not guilty as the court ruled that Reinhard and the temp worker had failed to follow critical safety procedures. For roughly 25 years, Evernew Metal Products specialized in finishing metal parts for outside vendors. The operation employed about 24 laborers, along with 2 owners, a general manager, a foreman, and a secretary. There was nothing especially modern or sophisticated about the setup of the plant. New employees learned the job the same way more experienced ones had, by watching someone else do it and picking up things along the way. There were no written safety manuals or formal training programs. What people knew came from handed-down knowledge, experience, habit, and mistakes. The basic process of the plant rarely changed too. Metal parts arrived from vendors and were hung on a conveyor system that carried them through a chemical cleaning tank. After that, the parts were left to air dry before being painted, baked, and shipped back out. A few times a year, the degreasing tank would need a good cleanout, which was a task that required the rest of the plant to be closed when executed. The plant operated Monday through Friday, so cleaning the degreasing tank took place on Saturdays when the building was otherwise empty and quiet. Only the people assigned to the job were present, and on that Saturday morning, Arnaldo, Thomas, and James were in the building alone. The tank they'd be cleaning was made of metal and had an irregular shape, measuring roughly 8 feet tall, 30 feet long, and 6 feet deep. There was also an opening at each end, just large enough for a person to enter. When in operation, the tank held a chemical solvent and functioned as part of the conveyor system that moved parts through the plant. The solvent used in the tank was trichloroethylene, which is a powerful industrial cleaner. During normal operations, it was heated in excess of 1600 degrees Fahrenheit or 871 Celsius, so it could produce vapors that stripped grease from metal surfaces as they passed overhead. The heating system would be shut down at the end of the work week, the chemical would be drained, and the tank would be left overnight to cool and vent. Then the following morning, a 3-person crew would arrive to complete the job. One worker would climb into the tank using a ladder and collect debris by hand, placing it into boxes that were passed through the openings. A second worker stayed outside to receive the boxes while a third stood by to assist as needed. The men would rotate positions every few minutes, and a simple household fan was typically used to move air through the tank during the process. This method had been used for years, and it was viewed as just part of the job. What happened inside the tank on a July day in 1986 had no witnesses. By the time police arrived that night, all 3 men were already unconscious, and none of them ever recovered enough to explain what had gone wrong. When they were pulled from the tank, Thomas was already dead. James was still alive, but was pronounced dead on arrival at a local hospital shortly afterward. Arnaldo remained unconscious and in critical condition until July 17th, when he ultimately succumbed to his injuries. In the days that followed, investigators from the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, or NIOSH, worked to piece together a likely sequence of events based on what they found at the scene. The tank had to be cleared of metal debris, but the conditions inside it were not what they were supposed to be. The trichloroethylene had not been fully drained, and the chemical was still extremely hot. Instead of being cooled and vented overnight, the solvent remained at a temperature high enough to release dangerous fumes. Exposure to this chemical in vapor form can cause serious harm to the eyes and soft tissues and can interfere with the nervous system. It's also been linked to damage in vital organs such as the liver and kidneys, which is why strict precautions are required when working with it. The ladder normally used to enter the tank was not in place, so to get inside, the men would have had to move along the conveyor system and lower themselves down. It's not entirely clear why the men deviated from the standard procedure at the time, but this decision likely impeded their ability to quickly escape from the vat once they sensed trouble. Several boxes filled with removed parts were sitting on the floor near the tank, showing that cleaning work had already been underway. At some point, one of the men cleaning up metal debris was likely overcome by the fumes inside the confined space. When he failed to come back out, one of the others appeared to have gone in after him, and the third soon followed. Once inside, the situation would have escalated fast. Trichloroethylene vapors can disorient and incapacitate within minutes. In a confined space with limited airflow, there was little chance to recognize what was happening or to escape once the fumes took hold. One officer later said that the skin of the 3 unconscious men appeared blackened and that Arnaldo in particular was foaming at the mouth. The air inside the factory also had a sharp, stinging odor, and even standing near the tank made the officers feel sick and faint. When emergency responders initially attempted to reach the men, they immediately realized the environment was far too dangerous to enter. Officers who went into the tank noticed that their shoes actually began to melt from contact with the still heated chemical. It was later determined that the trichloroethylene remaining in the tank was somewhere around 1000 degrees Fahrenheit or 538 Celsius at the time. The fumes were strong enough to injure those who were trying to help too. In the process of the rescue, 18 police officers and 9 paramedics were harmed and needed treatment of some sort afterward. 3 officers were actually bad enough to be admitted to Long Island College Hospital, although all were later listed in stable condition. In its report, NIOSH concluded that entry into the tank without proper ventilation, respiratory protection, or protective clothing exposed the workers to serious chemical hazards. As a result of the lack of written instructions, policies, and procedures, the report found that it was unlikely that the workers fully understood how dangerous trichloroethylene could be, particularly in a confined area like the degreaser tank. Essentially, it was almost just a matter of time before something happened. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, industrial robots were no longer just futuristic concepts. They were actually bolted to factory floors and wired into production lines. What had started as experimental automation in the 1960s grew into standard equipment in a heavy industry. Car manufacturers, metal processors, and electronics companies were all looking to improve speed and precision while reducing workplace risk and injury. And nowhere did that shift happen faster than in Japan. By 1981, the country was operating somewhere between 50 and 75,000 industrial robots, depending on the source. That meant Japan accounted for the overwhelming majority of robots in use worldwide, somewhere in the range of 70 to 80% of global deployment. Japan was adding roughly 20,000 new robots to manufacturing and factory floors every year. So while other nations were dipping their toes into the water in terms of industrial automation at the time, Japan had already fully committed to it. Now, the purpose of these machines is rather simple at the surface. Robots were built to handle tasks that people didn't want to do, couldn't do, or shouldn't have to do. They lift heavy components, weld metal in high-heat environments, move sharp or hazardous materials, and repeat these same motions thousands of times without fatigue. They don't get distracted, need breaks, or complain, and in theory, they reduce the number of workers exposed to dangerous conditions. With that said though, early industrial robots were not intelligent in any modern sense of the word. They followed programmed instruction and moved along fixed paths, and if something went wrong, they'd require human intervention. If something or someone entered their working space unexpectedly, they couldn't adapt. Instead, they'd continue the task they'd been told to perform. Most systems relied on physical barriers, warning signs, failsafes, and strict procedures to keep humans and machines separated, and for a while that worked just fine. On July 4th, 1981, 37-year-old maintenance worker Kenji Urata was assigned to check on a malfunctioning industrial robot at a plant operated by Kawasaki Heavy Industries. His job was one that kept him busy. Maintenance workers were routinely called in when robotic systems slowed down or stopped responding correctly. And with the number of machines in the plant, his work was never done. The malfunctioning robot Kenji was called to was enclosed by a protective fence, and the barrier wasn't just there as a visual warning. It was tied into the machine's safety system. If the gate was open, the power to the robot would automatically shut off, which made sense since no one should be inside the robot's operating area while it was live. For some reason on that day, however, instead of entering through the designated gate, Kenji climbed over the chain fence. This bypassed the system's failsafe, and at some point after entering the restricted space, the machine was activated. Reports later indicated that Kenji might have inadvertently pressed the start control when he leapt over the fence. But either way, once powered on, the robotic arm began its programmed motion, which didn't include the ability to detect a person standing within its range. The robot's arm struck Kenji from behind, impacting him violently in the back before forcing him against a nearby piece of equipment used to process car gears. The pressure actually pinned him in place, and he was crushed before anyone could intervene. Other workers were present in the facility, but they were not familiar enough with the robot's controls to immediately stop it. Apparently, it wasn't common knowledge that simply opening the fence gate would shut the machine down, so by the time someone figured out how to power it off, Kenji was dead. Details of his death were not released immediately, and information only became public after the Labor Standards Bureau completed its investigation in December of 1981. The findings pointed to two main problems. First, obviously, workers weren't familiar with the robotic systems they were maintaining. While the machines were part of everyday operations, specialized knowledge about their full range of functions and emergency procedures was limited. Second, the country's regulatory standards had not kept pace with the rapid expansion of automation. Japan had installed tens of thousands of robots in a short period of time while formal guidelines were still evolving. Kenji's death revealed just how fragile that system could be, and since Japan was the worldwide leader of automation at the time, Kenji's death was a black eye on the idea of robotics. In response, international news agencies scrambled to criticize the lack of regulation and governmental oversight. Many of those same agencies also reported that Kenji was the first person in the world to be killed by a robot, but that claim was not entirely accurate. 2 years earlier, a similar tragedy had already occurred in the United States. On January 25, 1979, a 25-year-old factory worker named Robert Williams was on a shift at a casting plant operated by Ford in Flat Rock, Michigan. Robert was part of a team responsible for overseeing a large parts retrieval system, and the machine he was supervising was massive. Weighing a full ton and standing 5 stories high, its job was to move heavy castings and materials from storage racks down to ground level as needed for production. It also kept a running inventory of supplies stacked on those shelves. That evening, the system began giving inaccurate inventory readings, and parts that were supposedly in place were not being retrieved correctly. The machine was also operating much slower than usual, prompting Robert to step in to figure out the problem and retrieve an accurate count of shelf products. Robert climbed into the huge shelving structure and ascended to the 3rd level, which stood about 3 stories above the factory floor. While he was inside the shelves, though, the robotic arm resumed its programmed cycle. The system's sensors didn't recognize him as a human being. It apparently misidentified him as an object in the storage unit that needed to be moved. The robot arm then struck him in the head from behind and crushed him against the structure. The robot then just continued doing its job for another 30 minutes around Robert's body until his coworkers eventually realized something was wrong. Robert's death is widely recognized as the first documented case of a human being killed by an industrial robot, and it had significant legal consequences. In 1983, Robert's family filed a lawsuit against the manufacturer of the robotic system and were ultimately awarded with $15 million in damages. At the time, this was the largest personal injury award in Michigan history. The immediate response to Kenji's death in Japan, meanwhile, was more practical than compensatory. The robot involved in the accident was removed from service at the plant, and taller, more secure fencing was installed around other robotic systems. Physical separation between humans and machines also became more strictly enforced. In the United States and elsewhere, similar incidents pushed manufacturers and regulators to refine safety standards. Lockout and tagout procedures became more formalized, ensuring that machines could not be powered on while maintenance work was underway. Emergency stop systems also became standard, and training requirements were expanded. The industry gradually came to understand that relying solely on barriers and assumptions about worker behavior was not enough. Despite these improvements, though, robot-related fatalities have still occurred since Robert and Kenji's tragic deaths. A study published in 2023 found that at least 41 people had died in robot-related incidents in the United States, with nearly half of those occurring in the manufacturing-heavy Midwest. While the number remains small compared to the scale of industrial automation, they serve to underscore that even well-engineered systems carry risk. And that risk, according to studies and experts, is still mostly human-induced. If you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. And a special thanks to everyone who supports the channel on Patreon or as a channel member. If you're interested, we offer early access videos that are released roughly a week before the regular YouTube uploads. Also, if you have a story suggestion, feel free to submit it using the form found in the description. Anyways, thanks again, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.